"There he is, officer. That's the man who broke into my house. Arrest him." That voice, a hysterical, panicked shriek, cut right through the quiet of my street, sounding like shattering glass on the pavement. I was standing there, the handle of my travel bag still warm in my hand, staring at the flashing red and blue lights painting my own front door. I'm Frank Harrison, a cybersecurity guy, and I'd just returned 2 weeks early from a major contract in Tokyo. The woman, pointing at me, the one demanding my arrest, was Veronica Klein, our HOA president, and she was wearing my late wife's silk kimono on my front porch. The sheer, monumental audacity of it was staggering. She called the cops on me for trespassing on my own property while she was the one living there. But the joke was on her because my early return wasn't a coincidence, and the phone I was holding wasn't for taking photos. It was the final piece of the most elaborate, technologically documented trap she had ever walked into. Drop a comment below right now and tell me what's the most insane, entitled thing an HOA president has ever done, because I promise you, the story of how this suburban tyrant got herself arrested for felony trespass on my front steps is one you won't forget. It all started 7 months earlier when I bought this place, my so-called dream home. After years of consulting and coding in cramped city apartments, I finally purchased a large, modern fortress of glass and steel out here in Grand Oak Estates. It was going to be my sanctuary, my quiet place away from the digital chaos of my work. The only pest in this perfect picture, the one I hadn't budgeted for, was the Homeowners Association and its self-appointed queen, Veronica Klein. My first encounter with Veronica was less than a week after I moved in. She showed up on my doorstep with a clipboard clutched to her chest, her blonde hair pulled into a severe ponytail, and a desperate-to-be-40 look. She drove an old but unnaturally pristine Mercedes, a perfect symbol for her whole existence, projecting a status she desperately craved. She informed me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth that my sleek, minimalist black steel mailbox was non-compliant. The approved model, she chirped, was a faux colonial monstrosity in forest green. The fine was $50 a day. I tried to be reasonable. "Veronica, the mailbox is part of the architectural flow of the house." She just stood her ground, condescendingly. "The rules are the rules for a reason, Mr. Harrison. They maintain the aesthetic integrity of our community." I relented, buying the ugly green box just to stop the paperwork. And that was my mistake. It was a sign of weakness she immediately exploited. The petty fines started raining down, my garbage bins visible for an hour after pickup, a small Japanese maple classified as unapproved flora, even a warning for having a package sitting on my porch for longer than 3 hours, an eyesore, apparently. It was suburban warfare by 1,000 passive-aggressive paper cuts. My neighbor, Arthur, a retired engineering professor, caught me one afternoon looking glum. He had the kind of kindly, knowing eyes that come from years of observing human folly. "Getting the Veronica treatment, are we?" He chuckled over the fence. He confirmed my suspicion. Veronica lived in one of the smaller, original ranch houses near the entrance, and he was convinced she was pathologically jealous of anyone who moved into one of the big, new places like mine. He said she once tried to fine a couple because their visiting grandchild had excessive balloonage at a birthday party. That's the level of tyranny we were dealing with. Then came the Tokyo contract, a huge, complex, high-stakes job. I had to be overseas for a full month. As a courtesy, and because their ridiculous bylaws required it for absences over 2 weeks, I emailed the board my itinerary, leaving May 1st, returning June 1st. I activated my custom-designed security system. Every door, every window, total sensor coverage. It was my job to protect digital fortresses. This physical one was easy. The first week was a blur of work, but by the second week, the anomalies started. A tiny alert I had programmed popped up. The thermostat in the master bedroom was manually adjusted from my energy-saving 65 degrees to a very comfortable 72. Then, the smart fridge logged the addition of a cheap bottle of white wine and a brand of store-bought yogurt I never touch. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a glitch. I pulled up the live feed. Someone had accessed my Plex account and watched 3 hours of a show called The Real Housewives of Grand Oak. I dove into my secure portal and navigated to the internal camera feeds. There she was. Veronica and her meek husband Gary were on my living room couch. She was wearing my cashmere throw, sipping from my crystal wine glass. They were using my remote, feet propped up on my ottoman. They weren't robbing me. They were living in my house. The sheer, staggering arrogance of it. I knew why. The contentious HOA bylaw required us to provide a key for emergency access. Veronica, the president, must have let herself in under some fabricated emergency and, upon finding the place empty, decided to upgrade her life for a month. She saw my email. She knew my timeline. She thought she had a clear 30-day runway. My first impulse was a blinding rage. I wanted to call the Tokyo police, the local police, anyone to drag her out of my home. But the professional in me, the cold, methodical strategist my clients paid a fortune for, took over. It would be my word against hers. She was the HOA president, the face of authority. I needed irrefutable, crushing, undeniable proof of intent. She thought she was having a secret vacation. She had no idea she had just become the unwitting star of her own private reality show. And I was the executive producer. For the next week, I became a digital phantom, haunting my own house from a laptop thousands of miles away. I spent every spare moment meticulously building a forensic file. I downloaded every second of footage from all 16 cameras. I had the crystal-clear video of them eating my food, sleeping in my bed, and Gary looking utterly miserable. The most infuriating and the most personally devastating was the footage from my master closet. I had kept my late wife Eleanor's beautiful clothes, unable to part with them. I watched, my jaw locked tight, as this entitled stranger draped Eleanor's favorite silk kimono over her shoulders, preening in the mirror. That was the moment the mission shifted from a matter of principle to something deeply, intensely personal. I documented everything. The data logs were a gold mine. I logged every time they used the Sonos system, creating a playlist of their terrible musical taste, all cheesy 80s soft rock. I noted the drop in weight of my premium coffee beans. I even had logs from the smart toilet I regret buying that recorded every single use. It was, frankly, too much information, but it was proof of residency. On one occasion, I watched them entertain another couple on my back patio, serving them my best single malt scotch and bragging about the perks of being on the HOA board. They treated my sanctuary like a free luxury hotel. The key to the whole case was intent. My state operated on a one-party consent law for recordings, and since I was a party to the surveillance of my own home, I could legally record them. I remotely activated the audio on the camera in my home office. I hit pay dirt almost immediately. I recorded a phone conversation where Veronica, her voice dripping with satisfaction, bragged to a friend. "Oh, it's fabulous, Marge. The owner is some rich tech nerd who's off in Asia for a month. The house is just sitting here empty. The least I can do is make sure everything is operational." She laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. The smoking gun came 2 days later. I was listening in live as she and Gary argued in the kitchen. Gary sounded nervous, whining. "Barb, are you sure about this? What if he comes back early?" And then Veronica delivered the line that sealed her fate. Her voice was sharp, dismissive, chillingly confident. "He won't. I have his itinerary. He's a creature of habit. We just have to make sure we're completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up, and he'll never even know we were here." I saved the audio file, labeled it Exhibit A, Mens Rea, Guilty Mind, and backed it up on 3 servers. It was done. I had her lying, her scheming, her intent to conceal, all in broadcast quality. It was time to call my lawyer, David Chen. I sent David a heavily encrypted email with a low-res photo of Veronica on my couch and a password-protected clip of the audio. His reply came within the hour. "Call me now." "Frank," he said after hearing the full story, "in 20 years of law, I have seen some truly brazen things, but this is a masterpiece of idiotic entitlement." He wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was a very enthusiastic partner in the coming operation. We mapped out the strategy. The key was the landing. I wouldn't be returning on June 1st. I booked my flight for May 15th, 2 weeks early. We would let her get comfortable, absolutely certain her fantasy was foolproof. And then I would simply come home. David's advice was simple. Let her make the first move. Let her call the cops. Her own outrage will be her undoing. The flight back felt like the longest journey of my life. I landed, bypassed my usual limo, and hailed a simple yellow cab, having it drop me 2 blocks from my street. I didn't want my usual driver to pull right up to the house. I needed to approach on foot. I saw Veronica's pristine Mercedes in her driveway, confirming she was definitely not at her own house. I pulled out my bag, adjusted my jacket, and began the slow walk toward my mansion. It was a perfect sunny afternoon. Peaceful, manicured, a peace I was about to shatter. As I rounded the final corner, my house came into view, and there she was, Veronica, lounging on my chaise lounge, the silk kimono draped over her, sipping from a wine glass. The queen of the castle. I kept my phone in my hand, recording. I walked at a steady, unhurried pace. She finally looked up. The sequence of emotions that flashed across her face was a sight to behold. Confusion, then dawning recognition, quickly followed by pure, undiluted panic. But the fear only lasted a second before it was subsumed by her fatal flaw, aggressive arrogance. She stood up. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice tight. "This is private property." I stopped at the foot of the porch steps, placing my suitcase down calmly. "Hello, Veronica," I said, my voice low and even. "I live here." Her face went a blotchy red. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "The owner isn't due back for 2 weeks." A beautiful, unintentional confession of her timeline. Before I could respond, she whipped out her phone. "You're a trespasser." "I'm calling the police," she shrieked, the sound echoing across the perfect lawns. I just stood there, impassive, and let her do it. She painted a picture of a dangerous intruder harassing a lone woman. I let her dig her own hole. Within minutes, the sirens were wailing. 2 police cruisers screamed around the corner. Sergeant Miller, the calm, seasoned cop, and a younger, eager officer got out. "That man, officer, he's a trespasser. He came onto my property and refused to leave." "Arrest him!" she screamed, pointing her trembling finger at me. "Officers," I said, my voice steady, a stark contrast to her hysterics. "There seems to be a grave misunderstanding. This is my house. He's lying. I'm the HOA president. I'm responsible for this property while the owner is out of the country." This was her trump card. Her title, the flimsy shield she hid behind. It was exactly what I wanted. She had publicly declared herself the responsible party. Sergeant Miller held up a hand. "Sir, can you provide me with some identification?" I deliberately retrieved my driver's license. Miller examined it, his eyes flicking from the photo to the address, 1120 Cypress Lane. The first domino had fallen. He looked over at Veronica. "Ma'am, the address on his license matches this house." Cornered by a simple fact, she became frantic. "So what? He could have stolen it. I'm telling you, as the president, this man is not the owner." "Officers," I said, breaking the tense silence, "I can definitively prove my ownership in about 3 seconds if you'll allow me to approach my front door." Miller nodded. I slowly walked past Veronica, whose eyes were wide with venom, and placed my right thumb on the biometric lock. There was a soft electronic chime, a click of the deadbolt retracting, and the heavy door swung open an inch. The silence that followed was deafening. You can't forge a fingerprint on the spot. Veronica was frozen, a statue of disbelief. I let the moment hang in the air. "Furthermore," I said, my voice resonating with cold clarity, "while I can certainly prove who I am, I also have incontrovertible evidence of who has been illegally residing in my home, consuming my property, and using my belongings for the past 17 days. Just then, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. David Chen got out looking sharp and composed. His arrival dramatically changed the temperature of the entire encounter. "Sergeant Miller," David said, extending a hand, "my name is David Chen. I am Mr. Harrison's legal counsel." My client has just returned from an international trip which was supposed to conclude on June 1st. We have reason to believe that this woman, Mrs. Klein, has been using his absence to illegally occupy his residence. That's a lie, Veronica sputtered, her excuse about plumbing issues evaporating. Daily inspections that involved sleeping in my client's bed, wearing his late wife's clothing, drinking his liquor, and hosting dinner parties? David asked, his voice laced with ice. He pulled out his tablet. To save everyone time, let's start with this. He pressed play. Veronica's smug, dismissive voice filled the air, perfectly clear. We just have to make sure we're completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up, and he'll never even know we were here. The officers looked from the tablet to Veronica, whose face had completely crumbled. All the bluster had drained away. She was speechless, and just when it seemed it couldn't get any worse, the front door I had unlocked creaked open further. Her husband, Gary, peered out, pale and slick with sweat. He saw the police and my lawyer. He cracked instantly. "I'm so sorry," he blurted out, rushing onto the porch. I told her it was a terrible idea. She made me do it." His pathetic, panicked confession was the final nail in her coffin. Sergeant Miller had heard enough. He took a deliberate step toward Veronica. "Veronica Jansen Klein," he said, his voice flat and official. "You have the right to remain silent." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. As the younger officer led a whimpering, utterly defeated Veronica toward the patrol car, my neighbor Arthur, who had been watching the entire drama unfold from his lawn, caught my eye. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod of approval, a gesture that spoke volumes. The Queen had been deposed, not in some stuffy boardroom, but in a public, humiliating spectacle on the steps of the very palace she had tried to steal. The aftermath was swift. Faced with the mountain of digital evidence, the hours of video, the logs, the damning audio, Veronica pleaded guilty to a felony charge. She was sentenced to probation, a massive fine, and full restitution for all damages and consumed goods. I meticulously calculated the cost of the food she ate, the wine she drank, and the premium scotch she served to her friends, down to the last coffee bean. I later learned she and Gary were forced to sell their house to cover the fees. The restitution check, when it finally arrived, I endorsed directly over to a local charity that provides housing for the homeless. It felt like the most fitting end for money obtained from such a gross abuse of shelter. But my victory wasn't just personal. It was about dismantling the toxic system she created. At the emergency HOA meeting, I attended with David. I showed the assembled homeowners the evidence. A still of Veronica hosting a party on my patio, and the transcript of her phone call bragging about her free vacation. This isn't about me, I concluded. This is about the principle that no one in our community should have the power to violate the sanctity of another's home. The enablers on the board folded like cheap suits. A motion to permanently rescind the dangerous emergency key bylaw passed unanimously. The entire board was shamed into resigning, and Arthur, the retired professor, was elected to lead a new, reasonable HOA. Weeks later, life had settled into a new normal. The ugly green mailbox Veronica had forced upon me was gone, replaced once again by my original sleek black steel one. I was sitting on my back patio one evening pouring myself a glass of that very same single malt scotch. The air was calm, the sun setting. Veronica's desire for a life of luxury she couldn't afford drove her to commit a crime that ultimately cost her the comfortable life she already had. She thought she saw a quiet tech nerd, not a man whose entire career was built on seeing patterns, gathering data, and patiently waiting for the right moment to act. She thought she was a wolf, sneaking into the sheep pen, never realizing the sheepdog was watching from halfway around the world, logging her every move. The whole crazy ordeal reinforced a lesson I'd learned long ago. Bullies, whether they're in a boardroom or a subdivision, thrive on the assumption that you won't fight back. But when you stand up with facts, with evidence, and with professional resolve, their power evaporates like morning mist. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. It's proof that sometimes the best security system is a little bit of patience and a whole lot of data.